We're here with our second game of the week coverage, this time it being Georgia at Ole Miss. This game taking place at 3:30 Eastern Time, and I believe it is also on ABC. This game also has not only huge implications for the SEC race, but also the playoff race. This really being Ole Miss' last chance to really make that playoff push after two really interesting losses, one at home against a Kentucky team, which was, I think, one of the most unexpected things we've seen all season, and then another one giving up that lead late in Baton Rouge against LSU. Right now, it's kind of the energy in the air in Oxford that Lane Kiffin needs to be able to win a game like this. It's a very similar feel to a game we had last week with Penn State taking on Ohio State. Of course, Penn State ended up losing that one. We've had the whole conversation about James Franklin and kind of where he's failed as a head coach. It's kind of the similar situation. And I think looping Lane Kiffin in on this, the whole rhetoric on how he coaches at Ole Miss can completely change with a win here. At this point in the season, Georgia looks like one of the more dominant teams. They had a scare last week against Florida. I think it comes down to really the ability of Carson Beck and the way he plays in this game. When he plays well, when he plays his best football, Georgia has no issue taking care of business. When he has games where he turns the ball over multiple times, Georgia has had multiple scares. Of course, you go back to the Alabama game where he had three turnovers, I believe four. He had a lot. It changed the course of the game. It almost affected them last week against Florida. If Florida probably doesn't lose DJ Lagway, we're talking about a different situation. But nonetheless, Georgia with one loss, Ole Miss with two. This is going to be a very, very exciting game. And right now, Gray, how do you feel about the current situation Ole Miss is in?
Yeah, I think overall, you talked about Lane Kiffin and his inability to get Ole Miss over that hump. This is a huge chance for Kiffin, his staff, and University of Mississippi to finally get over that football hump. Put themselves squarely in the race for Atlanta, even though they've had some weird losses, especially that home loss to Kentucky where they just forgot to score the football in the second and third quarter. But now Ole Miss is in a completely different spot. It's coming off an insane offensive performance in Fayetteville a week ago. And just 515 total passing yards. Jordan Watkins had 4 or 5 touchdowns receiving. Just Jackson Dart put on an absolute clinic. And you get a Georgia team coming into your house playing primetime slot, and you get a Georgia team who kind of banged up and struggled last week against a Florida team, especially early. And I know Ole Miss is banged up as well, for sure, but Ole Miss has an opportunity to make a huge statement here with a win in this game.
Yeah, you talked a little bit about Ole Miss being banged up. Right now, both wide receivers, Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins, both listed as doubtful on the availability report. Would be a huge loss for Ole Miss in this game, losing 2 of its biggest playmakers. I was so impressed with what Jordan Watkins was able to do last week. Just a historic performance against Arkansas. Yeah. Really, it's going to come down to the play of the quarterbacks. I think it's going to be most relied on. Jackson Dart's going to be expected to make these unbelievable plays and to execute in these huge moments. And Carson Beck's going to be expected not to turn the ball over. Flipping over to the Georgia side, I think it's going to be very reliant on his defense to get stops against his Ole Miss offense. Lane Kiffin has been known to be more of a front runner, as you would call it, to try to run up the score early to have a fairly sizable lead. So he's not panicking. It's going to be hard for Georgia to get stops early, but it's going to be necessary if they want to win this football game. And then another thing for Georgia, I think will be running the ball well. If you establish a good running game, if you were able to control time of possession, it really limits the amount of possessions Ole Miss has and the number of chances they have to score points. I think that's just simple math and common sense when it comes to playing the game of football. But it's obviously easier said than done. I think you look at both coaches, Kirby Smart, probably the best coach in college football right now, and then Lane Kiffin, who has spent time with them, of course, on Saban's staff in the past, both learning from the same mentor. So it's just two different styles of play really clashing, and I'm sure there's a little bit of bragging rights included within that, whoever will come out and win this game. I've been back and forth on this because it's easy just to say Georgia's going to come into Oxford and take care of business like they always do. They've been pretty good on the road. If the team isn't wearing an Alabama uniform, they've been pretty good. They've taken care of business. Could this be a possible situation where Ole Miss is under so much pressure to win a football game like this, and they proceed to come out and throw punches and try to take over the game and are able to have success early on rather than wait and have this dogfight battle against Georgia? Because I don't think there's a situation in which they win that. I think it's definitely them coming out early and landing punches. And I've been back and forth on it because I think Ole Miss is a very talented team, but they're banged up. And you want to go back and forth. Carson Beck, he's made a lot of poor decisions. I don't know if I can really trust him at this point in time, but I know the rest of that Georgia roster is so deep and they have so much depth, and they have bailed Carson Beck out time and time again. Right now, what are keys to victory for Georgia? And then I have some keys to victory for Ole Miss.
Yeah. For Georgia, it's take care of the damn ball. You have got to not be in a situation like you were against Alabama and not be in a situation like you were last week in Jacksonville against Florida. Because if you turn the ball over against this Ole Miss offense, they're going to turn it into points. And that's exactly what Alabama did, and you lost. And it's exactly what Florida was doing when they had their quarterback before they had to bring in a walk-on from Yale. And then it was just like, well, Georgia's going to be able to turn the ball over, but Florida's not going to score. It's not going to work. You take care of the ball, you're talented enough to go in and beat that Ole Miss team by 13 to 20 points, in my opinion. Because yes, Ole Miss is very high potent on the offensive end, and yes, Ole Miss is very banged up, but there's not but maybe 2 or 3 positions on this roster where I'd rather take the entire depth of Ole Miss over the entire position group of Georgia. And that's going to be huge in a game like this on the road in a tough environment. Even though Von Hemingway Stadium is not a tough environment, it's going to be loud. It's going to be a tough atmosphere to go in and win a game. But Kentucky did it. There's no reason that Georgia shouldn't go in and handle business in this game. Outside of, I think, 2 different quarters of football, I think Georgia's been by far the best team in the country this year. Outside of that first quarter in Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa, and outside of the first quarter in Jacksonville, Georgia has completely dominated, especially on the defensive end, completely dominated college football this year. What's to say they can't completely do it for 4 quarters in Oxford and dominate Ole Miss? Well, also, what's to say they have another quarter like they did against Alabama or Florida, and they start turning the ball over? And Carson Beck's, especially intermediate passing game decision-making, is causing them points, because against this Ole Miss offense, however banged up they are going to score points off of turnovers. That's literally what they are one of the best in the country at doing. So you've got to take care of the ball and control the line of scrimmage. You got to establish a run game with ETN. Got to get him back healthy, hopefully this weekend, and just go in there and win.
Yeah, very good points right there. And now it's a hard part because I'm supposed to pick out keys to victory for Ole Miss. How can Ole Miss find a way to win this game? Number one, the crowd has to get involved. The crowd has to be extraordinary. They have to be locked in. They have to be screaming. They have to get Georgia off their game. You look at the number of games Georgia has lost in the past, they have been rattled by the crowd. That is a huge thing. And then number two, I think it's a combination of maybe getting a little luck and getting one of your two star receivers healthy. So Justin Dart's not throwing to people who haven't really seen the field this season. I think that's part of it. But then another part is being able to execute in the early downs of possessions in the first and tens and then in the second downs. If you're able to be ahead of schedule on those downs, then Georgia will have a hard time stopping you on third down. That's how talented Ole Miss's offense is. They have the number of playmakers to be able to do that. I really trust Lane Kiffin and his play calling to be able to take care of business in those situations. But you've got to stay on schedule. You can't afford penalties. You can't do dumb things. You got to execute. Georgia's not going to be an easy team to beat. And then number three, if you really want to win this game, you're going to have to force turnovers. You're going to have to make Carson Beck uncomfortable. You're going to have to make him make poor decisions. He's shown them in the past. He showed it last week. He is a quarterback who is capable of really turning the tide of the game one way or the other. And if you want to win the game, you're going to have to do it to where it's in your favor. Right now, the line being 2.5 in favor of Georgia. Who do you like to win this game? I think I know your answer, but just go ahead and give it to me.
I like Georgia, and I like Georgia to cover pretty heavily. There's no reason they shouldn't go in and win this game pretty handily, especially with how banged up Ole Miss is. You were mentioning the wide receivers and also their star tight end, Caden Prescorn, being hurt, but also some injuries along that defensive line with Walter Nolan and JJ Pegues. I think Georgia should go in there and dominate. I'm picking Georgia to cover and cover massively. I'm definitely also picking the over. The over-under in this game is 54.5. I'm definitely picking the over. I think Ole Miss is going to score a lot of points in this game. But I think Carson Beck, his decision-making, if Georgia has 2 or less turnovers in this game, I think they win by two plus touchdowns.
I have been back and forth on this in the past few minutes, and I'm searching every single possibility that Ole Miss could possibly find a way to win. Could they possibly upset Georgia? Could they change the tide of their season? Could they do something historic in a season where it's been historic but for the wrong reasons? Mm-hmm. I just, with the injuries they have to their wide receiver room and their defensive line, I cannot in right mind pick Ole Miss to outright win this game. I think it'll be very competitive. I think Lane Kiffin will have a great game plan going in. But when you're missing your playmakers, it's hard to be a very talented team in Georgia. And unfortunately, I'll take Georgia to win, and I'll take Georgia to cover. I will also take the over. I think Georgia will score a majority of the points, but I know Ole Miss is very capable of putting up a bunch of points too. If this was a different situation and Ole Miss had a healthy roster, I would be very tempted to pick them just simply based off the fact of where the game is being played. Yeah. But unfortunately, it's not really landed in Ole Miss's favor. And I think this is definitely the game where you can finally say Ole Miss is out of playoff contention. Georgia would, of course, advance in the SEC race and keep their hopes alive for that SEC title. And of course, they're really going to be in the front seat for the playoff. They're leading the SEC. All right. Well, I think we made good picks, but if I think we're hopefully not going to come back to this video and look stupid. But we'll see. We'll see. I appreciate everyone for watching. This has been Fan to Fan Sports Network.